The NHS is also trying to change the way in which it does its business. And very crudely, what it's trying to do is to say, actually, at the moment, what we do is we employ more surgeons to fix people. Whereas actually, if we're going to be effective in the 21st century, what we've actually got to do is to change the mindset and focus on prevention in the first place. So going forward, the prevention agenda is actually going to be vital to the NHS in terms of public policy. And I guess my question was, if you're going to be credible in delivering a prevention agenda, is it credible that when you actually go and visit a hospital, that the first thing that you actually come across as you go to that hospital is a line of ashtrays with uniformed staff actually jostling with relatives in order to actually get to those ashtrays, and then they go back onto the ward and actually say, well, all of those problems that you've got is actually because you smoke. And it's those sort of things which actually, you know, if the NHS is going to be credible in a prevention agenda, then it has opportunity to become an exemplar for. Inevitably, the media focused on some headlines, and the media picked out the headline around attendance, and the challenge that I made in the interim report, which was to actually say that I believed that actually the 10.3 million working days that were lost each day, the 45,000 staff, full-time equivalent staff that actually equated to, was unacceptable, and that it was feasible to make a change by a third. And inevitably, media focused on the comparison and took the comparison as being the comparison between the NHS, public sector employer, and the private sector. Okay, and what I highlighted was actually the NHS absence rates were actually much higher than they were in the private sector. But as I will go on to show you, actually what they missed was that actually what I was doing was actually saying that that third was achievable because of existing NHS organisational performance. And what this table in the bottom left of the slide shows, and we mapped the performance of trusts right across the country. This is an extract from a very large data set, where we looked at some of the factors in terms of trust performance and their scores in terms of health and well-being of their staff. And we took markers from the staff survey to use as markers for that. And the trusts in green are trusts that performed in the upper quartile, as in, and were good at health and well-being support for their staff. And the trusts in red are, and these are real trusts, are actually trusts that performed in the bottom quartile. And what we found was a very powerful and very clear correlation. What we found was that trusts that did well in supporting their staff had lower absence rates, they had lower turnover rates, they generally spent less in terms of agency spend, but very importantly, and in a service organisation like the NHS, actually patient satisfaction was higher and patient outcome measures were better. So in this slide we've used MRSA infection rates, but there were other indicators that actually also showed better patient outcomes in the trusts that actually did well in terms of health and well-being scores. And the health check measures in the bottom corner are basically the auditing system that the NHS uses to actually look at how well trusts are performing. And again, what we found was that trusts that were doing well in terms of the health and well-being of their staff generally did better in terms of their scores against use of resources and in terms of quality of services. And these are small. This is an extra slide that some may have difficulty actually seeing. But if I can explain the table here, what we sought to show was the huge variation between NHS organisations in terms of attendance rates and in terms of actually what it would mean if poorly performing organisations moved either to average performance or better performance in terms of going forward. And what we showed was that trusts that performed better had more people at work. And that's something that we actually, you know, we know from a gut feeling. But these ranges are enormous. I mean, 1.75% to 7.5% or so in terms of attendance are huge variations across an organisation.